Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we are talking about two expressions that many English learners use interchangeably without realizing there are subtle differences between them. These are small words, but getting them right adds precision and naturalness to your English. And once you understand how each one works, the choice between them will feel completely instinctive.
Yes, and what I find interesting about this pair is that both are used by native speakers. Neither is wrong in most situations, but there are contexts where one sounds much more natural than the other, and there are situations where only one of them works. Today, we're going to map out all of that.
The two expressions today are between and in between. Let us start with between on its own.
Between is a preposition. It shows a position or relationship involving two or more specific things. Something is situated among or surrounded by those things.
The house is between the school and the park. She sat between her two friends. The talks are happening between the two governments. In all of those, between connects to specific named things that are the boundaries or the points on either side.
Between works when you have defined objects, places, or people that form the two reference points. The thing you are describing sits or happens within those reference points.
Between can also show a relationship involving more than two things when you're talking about choices or interactions among multiple parties. Choose between these three options. Negotiations between the 5 countries. Between us means among us, shared privately within our group.
Now, in between is used differently. In between has that extra in before between, and it functions slightly differently in terms of position and emphasis.
In between is used when you want to emphasize the space or interval between things rather than the things themselves. The focus shifts to the gap, the middle space, the area or time that separates two things.
There were trees on both sides and open fields in between. The focus is on the open fields as the middle space, the gap between the trees, in between.
She worked hard in the mornings and evenings with short breaks in between. The breaks are the middle spaces. In between emphasizes those gaps.
He spoke clearly at the beginning and end, but the middle section in between was confusing. In between highlights the middle portion between the two clearer parts.
So, between tends to focus on the relationship to specific reference points. In between tends to emphasize the gap, interval, or middle space itself.
Now, in between can also function as an adverb. This is when it stands alone without directly naming what it is between. The preposition between always needs to name the things on either side, but in between, as an adverb, can stand alone.
She visited twice, and in between, she traveled around the country. In between stands alone here. It means during the period between the two visits. No need to name them again because they were already mentioned.
He spoke for an hour, and in between took several questions. In between means during the gaps in the speech. It describes the interval without naming the specific things again.
He worked all day with very few breaks in between. At the end of a sentence, in between works as an adverb completing the thought. The breaks exist in the spaces between the work periods.
So this adverb use of in between is one of the most important distinctions. Between cannot stand alone like this at the end of a sentence or clause. You cannot say, he worked all day with very few breaks between. You need to say, between what? Between the tasks? Between the meetings? Between needs something named after it.
In between can stand at the end of a sentence without naming the reference points again, because those points are already understood from context. That's a key grammatical difference.
Now let's talk about more specific uses of between that in between cannot always replace.
Between is used for time periods. Between 9 and 5 means during the hours from 9 to 5. Between Monday and Friday. Between now and then. These are time boundaries, and between is the natural preposition.
Between is used for amounts and ranges. It costs between 50 and 100 pounds. She's between 25 and 30 years old. The temperature will be between 10 and 15 degrees.
Between is used in mathematical and comparative contexts. The difference between two numbers, the relationship between two variables, the connection between two concepts.
And between is used in phrases. Between you and me is a classic expression meaning in confidence, privately, just for us two. Between you and me, I think she's wrong. This is a fixed phrase. You wouldn't say in between you and me.
Between you and me is completely fixed. Do not replace between with in between here. It's not a phrase that takes the in.
And between is used in fixed phrases like read between the lines, which means to understand the hidden or implied meaning. She didn't say it directly, but if you read between the lines, you can see she's unhappy.
Now let me talk about some situations where in between sounds much more natural than between. When talking about a middle category or something that doesn't fit clearly into one group or another, in between is very natural.
She's not a beginner or an advanced learner. She's somewhere in between. In between here describes the middle space on a spectrum, not fitting clearly into either defined category.
He's neither tall nor short. He's kind of in between. The in between captures the middle ground, the neither one nor the other feeling. This works very naturally as a standalone description.
That color is not quite blue and not quite green. It's something in between. In between at the end of the sentence works perfectly here. You cannot say it's something between without naming what it is between.
So, when describing something or someone that falls in the middle of two categories or on a spectrum between two extremes, in between works beautifully as a standalone expression.
And in between can describe activities that happen during gaps in a schedule. I have meetings all morning. I will try to answer emails in between. In between here means during the gaps between the meetings, natural and concise.
She rests at midday and does her exercise in the early evening with some reading in between. The in between captures the gap between rest and exercise without having to name them again. Now let me talk about how between works with each, one another, and similar phrases. Between is used to describe mutual or reciprocal things. Between them, they raised 5,000 pounds. They share everything between them, the distance between one place and another.
And between is used in the phrase the difference between, which is one of the most commonly used phrases in academic writing, teaching, and analysis. We talk about the difference between two options, two approaches, two theories, always between.
You would not say the difference in between. The difference between is the fixed phrase.
Now let me talk about pronunciation briefly, because many learners say between and in between in the same way without giving the in any stress.
When you use in between to emphasize the gap or middle space, the in often gets a slight stress. She worked all morning and evening with hardly any breaks in between. The in carries a little extra weight.
But when between is a simple preposition, there is no extra in and no extra stress. She sat between her friends, just a neutral preposition.
The stress pattern can actually help listeners understand which meaning you intend.
Now, let me go through the most common mistakes learners make with between and in between.
Mistake number 1 is using in between where between is the fixed phrase. Saying between you and in between me, or using in between with mathematical ranges. Between 50 and 100, not in between 50 and 100.
Mistake number 2 is trying to use between alone at the end of a sentence without naming the reference points. Saying, he had breaks between, when you mean in between. Between always needs its reference points named. In between can stand alone.
Mistake number 3 is never using in between and defaulting to between in every situation, missing the elegant standalone adverb use of in between, missing the natural sound of it is something in between.
Mistake number 4 is using in between for time ranges, saying the shop is open in between 9 and 5 instead of between 9 and 5. Time ranges use between, not in between.
Mistake number 5 is using in between in fixed phrases that only take between. In between the lines instead of between the lines. Reading in between the lines does appear occasionally, but between the lines is the standard fixed phrase.
Mistake number 6 is treating in between as two completely separate words with no connection and using them independently in places where they only work together. Always treat in between as a unit.
And mistake number 7 is overanalyzing in casual speech, where either one would sound natural. In many contexts, both are fine, and a native speaker would use either without thinking. Save the analysis for writing and for the specific situations where one clearly works better.
Now, let me give you some natural example sentences so you can hear the rhythm of each one.
Ready?
The house sits between the river and the old town.
Between for position with 2 named reference points.
The park has paths on both sides and a fountain in between.
In between emphasizing the middle space, the gap between the 2 named paths. The price is between 200 and 300 euros.
Between for a numerical range.
She is a mix of her 2 parents, not exactly like either one. She is something in between. In between as a standalone description of the middle category.
Between you and me, I'm not sure this plan will work.
Fixed phrase, between.
He had classes from 9 to noon and from 2 to 5, with a lunch break in between.
In between as an adverb describing the interval without naming it again.
The relationship between the 2 characters is complex.
Between for the relationship involving named parties.
She is neither a full-time employee nor a freelancer. Her arrangement is in between.
In between, standalone to describe the middle ground.
Those examples really show both words in their natural homes. Now, let us do a practice round. I'll describe a situation, and you choose between or in between.
Ready?
A house sits with a river on one side and a forest on the other.
The house sits between the river and the forest. Between naming both specific reference points.
A person works shifts in the morning and at night. They sleep during the gap.
They sleep in between. In between as a standalone adverb for the gap.
You want to share a secret just with one other person privately.
Between you and me. Fixed phrase, between.
Someone is neither a child nor an adult. They're 13.
They're somewhere in between. In between as a standalone description of the middle ground.
A shop opens at 9 and closes at 5.
The shop is open between 9 and 5. Between for a time range.
2 meetings happen in the morning. During the gap, someone checks their phone.
In between the meetings, or he checked his phone in between. In between for the interval between named events.
You want to describe the difference separating 2 methods.
The difference between the 2 methods. Fixed phrase, between. Every answer was natural and correct.
And I hope listeners were noticing the guiding questions. Are specific named reference points needed? Between. Is the focus on the gap, the middle space, or the interval that can stand alone? In between.
Named reference points equals between. Gap or middle space equals in between.
Now, let me close with something that I think will really settle these 2 words in your mind permanently.
Please.
Think of between as a bridge connecting 2 specific named things. The bridge goes from one bank to the other and it touches both. Between always touches both named things.
And think of in between as the middle of the bridge itself, the space above the water, the part that is neither on one side nor the other. In between lives in that space and can describe it on its own.
Between connects to the named things. In between inhabits the space between them.
That image makes the whole distinction feel almost physical, and physical images are the ones that stick.
Thank you so much for being here today. We hope between and in between feel completely natural and clear, and that you feel genuinely confident using both of them accurately in any situation.
Keep going, and we'll see you in the next episode.